The wind clawed at the fields like a living thing, howling through the naked branches and sweeping across the frozen ground with a cruelty that felt personal, as if winter itself had chosen this night to test the limits of human endurance, and Jacob pulled his threadbare coat tighter around his shoulders, though he knew it did little good, the fabric worn thin from years of patching and repatching, smelling faintly of smoke and road dust, while beside him his 2 children trudged silently. Their small boots crunching against the frost-hardened earth, each step an effort, each breath puffing out in pale clouds that vanished almost instantly into the black sky. Lily, only 7, clutched her little brother Thomas's hand, her fingers red and stiff with cold, yet she refused to let go, her jaw set with a determination far beyond her years, while Thomas, barely 4, stumbled now and then, his legs weak with hunger and exhaustion, his nose running, his lips trembling not just from the cold but from the quiet fear he didn't yet have words to express. Jacob noticed every stumble, every shiver, and each one landed in his chest like a hammer blow, because a father was supposed to protect his children, to give them warmth, food, safety, and here he was leading them down a dark country road with nowhere to go, no fire to warm them, no roof to shelter them from the merciless cold, only the faint hope that somewhere ahead, someone might show them kindness. The memory of how they'd ended up here replayed in his mind like a cruel refrain, the factory closure, the unpaid wages, the eviction notice slapped onto their apartment door like a final insult, the shelters already full, the friends who meant well but had little to spare, and his wife's grave, still fresh in the earth, the loss that had hollowed him out long before winter ever arrived, leaving him to shoulder grief and responsibility alone. The children didn't complain, not once, and that was what hurt the most, because he remembered a time when Lily used to chatter endlessly and Thomas would laugh at the smallest things, and now silence had settled over them, heavy and cold, as if they'd learned too early that noise didn't change hunger and tears didn't melt ice. When Jacob finally spotted the farmhouse in the distance, its windows glowing faintly like small islands of light in the darkness, his heart lurched with a mix of hope and dread, hope that there might be warmth within those walls, dread of the humiliation that always came with asking for help, the lowered eyes, the polite refusals, the doors that closed just a little too quickly, and he hesitated at the edge of the long driveway, his boots sinking slightly into the snow, wondering if he should turn back, though he had no idea where back even was anymore. Lily looked up at him then, her eyes too big in her thin face, and whispered, "Papa, are we stopping?" And something in her voice, so tired yet still trusting, broke whatever hesitation remained, because even rejection was better than letting his children freeze in the open. They walked up to the house, the crunch of gravel sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night, and Jacob lifted his hand to knock, his knuckles hovering inches from the door as doubt surged again, but before he could lose his nerve, he rapped softly, then harder, the sound echoing through the warm-looking home. Inside, the woman named Margaret sat by the fire, knitting, the steady click of needles a comfort she'd relied on since her husband passed, the radio murmuring low in the background with weather warnings about dropping temperatures and dangerous wind chills, and she frowned slightly at the knock, because no one ever came by this late, not in winter, not out here, and she set her knitting aside, rising slowly, her joints stiff, her mind already rehearsing a cautious response, because the world had taught her that kindness needed boundaries. When she opened the door, the cold rushed in like an uninvited guest, and with it the sight of the men and the 2 children standing on her porch, their faces pale, their clothes thin, the little boy leaning heavily against his sister, and for a moment Margaret simply stared, the scene colliding with her quiet evening in a way that stole her breath. Jacob swallowed hard, his pride shriveling under her gaze, and in a voice rough from cold and shame he said the words he'd practiced in his head a dozen times on the walk up, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but may we sleep in your barn? It's freezing," and he forced himself to meet her eyes, bracing for the familiar tightening in his chest that came with waiting for an answer. The children stood still, almost statuesque, as if they understood that any movement might tip the scales against them, Lily's fingers digging into Thomas's sleeve, Thomas's head bowed, too tired to even look up. Margaret felt something twist deep inside her, a memory surfacing unbidden of another winter, decades ago, when she'd been a little girl huddled in a drafty house with parents who worried quietly about making ends meet, and though she'd never known hunger like this, she knew the look in the man's eyes, the look of someone who'd exhausted every option. She glanced past them toward the barn, sturdy but unheated, filled with hay and the lingering smells of animals long gone, a place she'd offered to travelers before in better weather, and for a split second the practical part of her mind considered it. It would be simple, minimal involvement, a compromise between kindness and caution, and Jacob noticed her eyes flicker that way and felt his heart sink just a little, because even the barn, as cold as it was, would at least block the wind. The silence stretched, the wind moaned, and snowflakes began to drift lazily from the sky, settling on Jacob's hair, on Lily's shoulders, melting into damp patches that would soon turn icy, and just as Jacob opened his mouth to add something, anything that might sway her, Margaret spoke, her voice steady but softer than he expected. "You can't stay in the barn," and the words hit him like a physical blow, his shoulders sagging as a familiar despair washed over him, because he'd known this was likely, and yet hope had made it hurt all the same. Lily's lower lip trembled, Thomas whimpered quietly, and Jacob nodded, already stepping back, already preparing to thank her anyway because politeness was the last thing he had left to give, when Margaret continued, "It's too cold out there," and she opened the door wider, warm light spilling out onto the porch like an invitation. "You'll freeze," and she gestured toward the inside of her home. "You're coming in here," and for a heartbeat Jacob couldn't process what she was saying, his mind lagging behind her words as if they were spoken in another language. When understanding finally dawned, it hit him all at once, a wave so powerful it made his knees weak, and he felt his eyes burn, tears threatening to spill despite his efforts to stay composed, because he hadn't expected this, not the warmth, not the certainty in her voice, not the absence of conditions or suspicion. "Ma'am. I don't want to impose," he stammered, the reflexive protest born of years of being made to feel like a burden, but Margaret shook her head firmly, the way she used to with her own children, and said, "You're not imposing. You're cold. Your children are cold. That's all I need to know," and something in her tone brooked no argument. She ushered them inside, closing the door against the wind, and the sudden warmth made Thomas sag with relief, his little body relaxing for the first time in hours, Lily blinking as if she couldn't quite believe the glow of the fire was real, Jacob standing awkwardly just inside the threshold, afraid to step too far, afraid to touch anything, the smell of soup and wood smoke wrapping around him like a forgotten comfort. Margaret fetched blankets, thick and heavy, and draped them around the children, kneeling in front of them, her movements brisk yet gentle, and when she looked up at Jacob again, she saw tears sliding silently down his face, his shoulders shaking as the weight he'd been carrying finally cracked, and in that moment he turned away, pressing a hand to his mouth, because the simple kindness of being welcomed, of not being turned away, had undone him completely. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely, the words inadequate, and Margaret felt her own eyes sting as she replied, "You're safe here tonight," unaware that this decision, made in a single moment, would ripple outward in ways none of them could yet imagine, changing their lives forever. And if this story has already touched your heart, if you believe that small acts of kindness can change the world, then take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel, because stories like this remind us who we are and who we can be, and you won't want to miss what happens next, as the night deepens and truths are revealed in Chapter 2.